My mother-in-law sent me a designer handbag for Christmas. The tag said, "For the less fortunate." I laughed and texted her, "Thanks for thinking of me." She replied, "You're welcome. I guess you need it more than I do," and then my husband stormed into the room. This all started on Christmas morning. I was sitting by our tree, still half in my pajamas, unwrapping presents while texting my husband, Lucas, about breakfast. Then I opened a gift bag from my mother-in-law, Priscilla. It was a stunning Chanel bag, and inside, a note, "For the less fortunate. Wishing you a happy Christmas anyway." I actually laughed. It was so absurdly passive-aggressive it felt like a joke. I texted her, "Thanks for thinking of me," and she replied, "You're welcome. I guess you need it more than I do." 5 minutes later, Lucas came storming through the door, red in the face, phone in hand. He yelled at me about starting drama with his mother. And that's when I realized he wasn't on my side at all. It made me start seeing our whole marriage differently. Lucas stood in front of me, sweaty from his run, his breath coming quick and shallow like he'd sprinted home. "Why would you send her that?" he demanded, voice sharp, holding up his phone like a piece of evidence. I blinked at him, still holding the Chanel bag in my lap. "Send what?" I said, confused. He shoved the screen toward me. It was a screenshot, my text, her reply, and then a long message from Priscilla to him about how I was mocking her gift and deliberately hurting her feelings on Christmas Day. Still clutching the bag, I pointed to the tag nestled inside. "Lucas, she wrote this," I said, voice quiet but trembling. "She said, 'For the less fortunate.' How was I supposed to take that?" He barely glanced at it. "You know how she jokes," he said, exasperated. "You didn't have to escalate it." Escalate it. That word lodged itself into my chest like a splinter. As if her deliberate cruelty was just background noise I was supposed to accept, and I was the one making it worse by daring to respond. I sat there on the floor by the tree, surrounded by ripped wrapping paper and bows, feeling the cold press of reality against me. My husband would always defend her. Later, I replayed the morning in my head over and over. Hadn't he seen how tightly Priscilla clutched her pearls every time she looked at me? Hadn't he noticed the way she once joked at Thanksgiving that my mashed potatoes were so charmingly rustic because I must not have had much practice growing up? All the little comments. The tight smiles. The lingering stares at my not designer clothes, my modest little wedding ring. It had been there all along. I had just been too in love, too eager to belong, to admit it. After Lucas stormed off to shower, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the heavy gray sky press down on Charleston's palm trees. Our neighbors' homes were strung with cheerful lights. Kids' laughter floated across the street. Inside our house, it felt like the air itself had soured. I didn't know it then, but that Christmas morning was the beginning of the end. Over the next few weeks, everything shifted. Lucas wasn't outright cruel, not yet, but he withdrew. He grew colder in small, almost imperceptible ways. He spent more evenings at work, more weekends visiting friends. When we were together, he was distracted, impatient. When I brought up what happened, he brushed it off. "Just let it go, Hannah," he said once while scrolling through his phone. "It's not worth fighting about." But it wasn't just a Christmas gift. It was the pattern. Priscilla kept finding ways to jab at me, to insert little poisoned barbs into every interaction. When we went to a family dinner, she handed me a homemade casserole in a disposable tin, saying, "I figured you'd appreciate a no-frills meal." She gifted Lucas an engraved Rolex for his birthday while giving me a scented candle, from a clearance bin, I later discovered. Each slight was tiny enough to deny on its own. But together, they built a mountain between us. And Lucas. He kept siding with her. Or pretending not to notice at all. One night in February, I finally said it out loud. We were lying in bed, the TV flickering quietly. I turned to him, my heart pounding. "I feel like you always take her side," I said. He sighed, heavy and long, like I was exhausting him. "You're too sensitive," he muttered. "You read into everything." I stared at the ceiling in the dark, blinking back tears. I started seeing a therapist the next week. Dr. Klein was calm, unflappable. She didn't gasp or scowl when I told her about Priscilla's tag, about Lucas' reaction. She just nodded thoughtfully, took notes, and asked questions that burrowed under my skin. "Has he ever stood up for you against his mother?" she asked once, pen poised. I thought back. Hard. Maybe once, early on, when Priscilla made a comment about my plain wedding dress. Lucas had chuckled awkwardly, said, "Mom, knock it off." But he'd brushed it away immediately, apologizing to her more than to me. That was it. Dr. Klein's words were steady, but they felt like an earthquake. "You're being emotionally abandoned. He's choosing comfort with his mother over loyalty to you." I drove home from her office that day with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Maybe I'd always known, somewhere deep down. But hearing it spoken so plainly made it impossible to unknow. In the spring, Marlena's wedding planning kicked into full gear. Priscilla practically lived on speakerphone with Lucas, discussing venues, menus, guest lists. Marlena was marrying Victor, a soft-spoken architect who grew up in a family much more suitable, as Priscilla once put it. One evening, while Lucas was in the shower, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A text from Priscilla. I wasn't snooping, the screen was just there, glowing. It said, "Maybe we should just tell Hannah not to come to the wedding. I don't want her ruining Marlena's day with her moodiness." I stood there, staring at it, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Lucas came out of the bathroom in gym shorts and a towel slung over his shoulder. I held out his phone without a word. He read it. Flinched. Put it down. Said nothing. The silence between us roared. "You were going to let me go anyway," I said finally, voice cracking. He shrugged, running a hand through his damp hair. "I didn't want to make it a big deal." A big deal. I packed a bag that night. He didn't stop me. I stayed at my friend Curran's place for the first few nights. She had a little bungalow near the marshes, all driftwood furniture and mismatched pottery. It smelled like cinnamon and old books. It was the first time in a long time that I could actually breathe. The first morning after I left, I woke up disoriented. For a second, I thought I was still in my own bed, still tangled up in Lucas' scent, still living inside that knot of resentment and hope. But when I turned and saw Curran's lopsided bookshelf instead of my own dresser, it all came rushing back. Lucas didn't call that day. Or the next. On the third day, I finally texted him. "Do you want to talk?" Hours passed. Then he replied, "Maybe in a few days. Things are too tense right now." Too tense. I almost laughed. As if tension were some wild animal that had wandered in, instead of something carefully cultivated, fed, and protected by him. I spent a lot of time walking by the water. Charleston has a way of making you feel small in a good way, the marsh stretching endlessly under heavy clouds, the tidal creeks pulsing in and out like a heartbeat. I thought about my life. About the slow erosion of myself over the years. About how many times I'd swallowed my pride, convinced myself it was noble to endure. Was this what marriage was supposed to feel like? A quiet war of attrition? One evening, Corinne and I sat on her back porch, a bottle of cheap wine between us. "You know," she said, twirling her glass, "I always thought Lucas was charming. But not warm." I stared out at the dark water, the ripple of moonlight across the surface. "Yeah," I said. "I think I mistook one for the other." Corinne didn't push. She just sat with me in the heavy, forgiving silence. About a week later, Lucas asked me to come by the house to talk. I told myself not to hope. But I hoped anyway. When I walked through the front door, everything looked the same framed wedding photos, the same shoes kicked carelessly by the stairs. But it felt like a museum of a life I no longer lived. Lucas was sitting on the couch, arms folded, looking tired. Defensive. "I don't want a divorce," he said immediately, before I could even sit down. "I think we can work through this." Work through this. Like it was a plumbing issue. A scheduling conflict. I perched stiffly on the edge of the armchair. Lucas, I said carefully, I need to know. Do you even see what the problem is? He sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. You're too sensitive about my mom. She's just traditional. Set in her ways. You blow things out of proportion. It was like being doused with cold water. I leaned forward, my voice shaking. She humiliated me, Lucas. Over and over. And you let her. He looked genuinely bewildered, like he couldn't imagine what I wanted from him. I just don't think it's worth blowing our marriage over, he said. That was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. It wasn't that Lucas was malicious. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He just didn't care enough not to. He wanted peace. But only if the cost came out of my pocket. I stood up slowly. I think it's already blown up, I said. He didn't try to stop me when I walked back out the door. The weeks blurred into each other after that. I officially moved my things out. Corinne and her boyfriend helped me rent a storage unit. I filed for a legal separation. Lucas didn't fight it. He signed the paperwork like he was signing for a package he hadn't ordered but didn't want to return either. Priscilla sent me one last parting shot, a letter, in her sharp, looping handwriting, delivered through my lawyer. I'm sorry you couldn't rise to the standards expected of our family, she wrote. I hope you find contentment among your own kind. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Spring turned into humid Charleston summer. I got a job at a little art supply store downtown, creaky wooden floors, dusty sunlight pouring through the windows. I started painting again, mostly in the evenings, when the city softened and the cicadas screamed. It wasn't a glamorous life. It wasn't the life I thought I was building with Lucas. But it was mine. Sometimes, when I walked along the Battery, I would pass the big white mansions lined up along the water like sentinels, and I would think about Priscilla. About the fortress she'd built around herself, walls of wealth and breeding and brittle, terrified pride. I didn't envy her anymore. About 3 months after I moved out, Marlena's wedding happened. I didn't go. Obviously. I saw the photos on Facebook, though. Priscilla beaming, Lucas stiff and polished in a rented tux, Marlena glowing in a dress that probably cost more than my annual salary. I felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of mourning. For the life I had tried so hard to fit into. For the dream that was never really mine. The next week, a small box arrived at Curran's house. No return address. Neat handwriting. Charleston postmark. Inside was the Chanel bag. The one from Christmas. Tucked inside, a note on heavy cream stationery, figured you could use it more than I can. No signature. I stared at it for a long time. Then I zipped the bag back into its dust cover, drove to a women's shelter downtown, and donated it without a second thought. Somewhere, I hoped, it would find a new life. With someone who needed a piece of beauty more than they needed a reminder of pain. Driving back from the shelter, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel sad, either. Just clean. Like I'd set something down that I had been carrying for way too long without even realizing it. That night, I sat on Curran's porch again, barefoot, drinking sweet tea and listening to the cicadas scream into the humid darkness. I think that bag was the last thing tying me to them, I said, watching the fireflies flicker over the grass. Corinne gave a small nod. Good riddance, she said. No dramatics, no lectures. Just two women sitting in the thick, forgiving summer night, breathing easier. I slept better that night than I had in months. About a month later, the legal divorce papers came through. It was quicker than I expected. Lucas didn't contest anything. No drawn-out battles, no arguments over the furniture or the dog we didn't have one. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we were both letting go. When I signed my name on the last page, my hand didn't shake. I walked out of the lawyer's office into a hot Charleston afternoon, the pavement shimmering, the scent of pluff mud rising from the marshes. A life gone. A life waiting. I found a tiny studio apartment not far from downtown. It was barely bigger than a shoebox, a narrow kitchen, a slanted little bedroom, a window that rattled in the wind, but it was mine. I bought mismatched furniture from thrift stores. I painted the walls a soft, hopeful blue. I hung cheap fairy lights along the windows and tacked up old postcards I found at the flea market. The first night I slept there, I lay on my mattress on the floor, listening to the creak of the building settling, the muffled laughter of neighbors through the thin walls, and I felt something deep in my chest: freedom. Not loud or dramatic. Just steady. Like the first real inhale after holding your breath underwater for too long. Life wasn't perfect, though. Money was tight. Sometimes, when I walked home after a long shift at the art supply store, my legs aching and my shoulders sore from hauling boxes, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Sometimes, late at night, I missed Lucas. Or rather, I missed the idea of him. The idea of someone waiting at home, of warm dinners and shared inside jokes and plans for the future. But then I'd remember the heavy, hollow ache of being unseen. The bone-deep loneliness of lying next to someone who had already chosen someone else over me 1,000 tiny times. I never missed that. Around the edges of my new life, small, good things started to bloom. I joined a local painting group that met on Saturdays in the park. We sat under the massive, sprawling limbs of the angel oak, our canvases propped on uneven picnic tables, sketching the world around us. I started tutoring art classes at the community center twice a week. Kids with bright, eager faces who didn't care about brand names or social climbing, just the simple magic of colors mixing on paper. I met people. Not all at once, and not easily, but genuinely. One of the regulars at the art store, a retired teacher named Mrs. Delaney, took a shine to me. She would bring in homemade cookies, gossip about her church knitting group, and tell me about her grandchildren. "You have kind eyes," she said once, handing me a Ziploc bag of snickerdoodles. "You remind me of my daughter." It was such a simple, sincere thing to say. It caught me off guard. I swallowed hard around the lump in my throat and thanked her. Then, one afternoon, months after the last conversation with Lucas, I ran into Marlena. I was walking through the farmer's market, juggling a basket of peaches and sunflowers, when I spotted her near the honey booth. She looked different, thinner, more brittle. The diamond on her left hand sparkled aggressively in the sunlight. For a second, we just stared at each other. I could have ducked away. Pretended not to see her. But something inside me, something quieter and stronger than anger, made me walk up and say hello. "Hey, Marlena," I said, keeping my voice even. She blinked, clearly surprised. "Hannah." An awkward pause. "You look well," she said finally, but there was a tightness to it, a nervous flick of her eyes. "You too," I said politely, even though it wasn't true. Another pause. People bustled around us, laughing and bargaining over tomatoes and fresh bread, the living pulse of the city weaving on without us. Marlena opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, "I didn't know. I mean, I didn't want things to happen like they did." I didn't answer right away. Because what was there to say? That her silence was just as loud as Priscilla's cruelty? That standing by while someone gets hurt is its own kind of violence? Instead, I just gave a small shrug. "It did," I said simply. She looked down, picking at the hem of her designer cardigan. "Lucas isn't," she started, then trailed off. "He's not doing great." I raised my eyebrows but said nothing. What was I supposed to feel? Pity? Relief? Nothing I felt would fix anything. I shifted the basket in my arms. "Take care of yourself, Marlena," I said, meaning it. And then I turned and walked away, the sun warm on my back, the scent of ripe peaches filling the air. I didn't look back. As summer bled into fall, the world kept turning. The air grew crisper. The tourists thinned out. Charleston's gardens went from bright blooms to russet and gold. And for the first time in years, my life didn't feel like something I was surviving. It felt like something I was living. The art store promoted me to assistant manager. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and it gave me a little breathing room. I started saving up for a better car, maybe even a real vacation someday. I took long bike rides by the river, taught painting classes to kids who still thought magic lived in trees and clouds, and ate dinners at my tiny kitchen table with real satisfaction, even if it was just peanut butter toast and a glass of wine. Piece by piece, I rebuilt myself. But there was still one piece of unfinished business lingering in the background. Priscilla. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. Hadn't heard from her, beyond that pathetic gift of the Chanel bag. But Charleston is a small town when it wants to be. Word got back to me through Corinne, who had a cousin who worked at one of the downtown boutiques, that Priscilla was trying to open a high-end art gallery. A legacy project, someone called it, meant to boost her status even higher among the city's old guard. I snorted when I heard. Priscilla, curating art. She didn't know a Monet from the menu. But she had money. And clout. And a name that still opened doors. Apparently, though, she had a problem. She needed a local artist with enough credibility to front the gallery opening. Someone respected. Someone authentic. Someone like me. I laughed out loud when Corinne told me. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a blade. At first, I was tempted to ignore it. I didn't need anything from Priscilla. I had built a quiet, real life without her. But then I thought about all the humiliations. The smirks. The Christmas tag. The years spent trying to be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. And I realized, I didn't want revenge that hurt her. I wanted revenge that outgrew her. So I reached out through a mutual connection, an old gallery coordinator I knew from the art group. I said I'd be willing to meet with the prospective patron about contributing to her new gallery. I didn't mention my name. I wanted her to have to sit there and see me, truly see me, and know that the person she spent years trying to belittle was now the very key she needed. The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon, at a little bistro downtown. I wore a simple sundress, nothing fancy, nothing screaming for attention. Just clean, comfortable, me. When I walked in, Priscilla was already seated at a corner table, flipping through a leather portfolio with a pinched look of impatience. She looked up when the hostess led me over. For one perfect, suspended moment, she didn't recognize me. Then her mouth tightened. Her hands curled slightly on the tabletop. "Hannah," she said, voice cold and brittle as cracked porcelain. "Priscilla," I said smoothly, sliding into the seat opposite her. There was a long, tight pause. "I wasn't aware you were." "Still painting," she said finally. "Still painting." As if creativity was something I had misplaced, like an old jacket. "I never stopped," I said simply, smiling. Another beat of silence. She flicked her eyes down at the portfolio, then back at me. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked to meet," she said. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands loosely in my lap. "I have a pretty good idea." She cleared her throat, uncomfortable. "The gallery opening is important to me. I want to feature a local artist. Someone relatable. Relatable. Code 4, not a rich debutante's niece. Code 4, someone real enough to lend her venture credibility." She needed me. And she hated it. I could see it in every tense line of her posture, every forced word. It was delicious. I listened, politely, as she laid out her plan. How my work would be highlighted, how there would be press opportunities, how it would be mutually beneficial. When she finally finished, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon, I let the silence stretch just a little too long before speaking. "I'm honored you thought of me," I said sweetly. "But I'm afraid I'll have to decline." Her face flickered, just for a second, with pure disbelief. "I have my own exhibition coming up at the city center," I continued, letting the words drop calmly between us. "A solo show. Opening night is already booked solid." That part was true. Thanks to months of work, networking, and small shows, I'd finally been offered a solo exhibit. It wasn't in the fanciest hall in Charleston, but it was real. Earned. Priscilla's mouth opened and closed once, like a fish gasping on dry land. I gathered my bag, standing up with smooth finality. I wish you the best with your gallery, though, I said warmly. I'm sure you'll find someone. I let that last word hang in the air, vague, dismissive, just like all the ways she'd treated me. Then I smiled. A real smile. Not cruel. Not triumphant. Just free. And I walked away, the late afternoon sun hot on my back, the city humming around me, alive and wide open. A month later, my solo exhibition opened. People came. Friends. Neighbors. Strangers who wandered in and stayed because something about my painting spoke to them. Corinne brought flowers. Mrs. Delaney brought cookies. My little art students dragged their parents in by the hand, pointing excitedly at their favorite pieces. I stood in the center of it all, my name in bold letters on the program, my heart full, and realized this was the best revenge. Not bitterness. Not cruelty. Not even winning. Just becoming someone she could never touch.